Can the mysterious giant wolf truly integrate into the new pack? What will the future hold for her and the one who claims to be her mate? Can she who was created get rid of the shadow of the past and control the beast within? Dive into the world of genetically modified werewolves. Subscribe. Chapter 10. Slade only had a split second to retract his hands away just as Nine's jaw clamped down on the empty air where his hand had previously been. Any second later and Slade would only have one hand. Suddenly hissing, Slade twisted his hand to see blood running down his arm. Guess he wasn't fast enough, he thought, and wiped away the blood where Nine's teeth grazed his skin, leaving a nasty cut. Turning back to his mate, he saw her eyes were tinted red, but the white was still prominent. Dexter told him of the signs to look out for when with his mate. Almost got me there. Slade chuckled lightly. He wasn't angry with her. It was his fault for trying to push Nine past her limit. He wanted to know how far he could get with her before she snapped, but Slade knew that the next time he wouldn't get so close. Not because she will attack, but because now Nine will be wary of him, and he needed to build up her trust before he could attempt to touch her again. Eyes narrowed and ears flat against her head, Nine slowly backed away whilst watching the male carefully. Her body was tense and ready for him to attack. Her master would have cruelly punished her for even touching him, let alone leaving a mark on his body and drawing blood. The beast inside her did not allow her to cower in front of her master. He was too dominant to submit immediately, which resulted in her beating being more brutal. Nine snapped out of her memory and waited for the green-eyed male to make the first move. The male shook his head before looking straight in her eyes. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said softly, as if he was talking to a skittish animal. Nine didn't move and kept her eyes on him. Slade bent down and picked up the tray with the now cold breakfast. "I'll go warm this up. Be right back," Slade said, but hesitated to leave. Only when Nine turned around, showing her back to him, that he finally stepped towards the door. Once the door shut did Nine collapse on the ground. She was mentally exhausted from all the stress, and especially from the green-eyed male. She tried not to think about him, but her mind disobeyed. Why didn't he punish her? She thought with a low growl. The male's actions confused her greatly. Nine wished Dexter was here to clear up her confusion. With a huff, she thought it better to just completely ignore him. Even though it didn't go well today, but the next time she would just keep silent. Since the male said he won't hurt her, Nine would use it to her advantage. Her master didn't punish her only for control, but he knew that she would start to rebel, guaranteeing his death if she were ever to turn against him. Closing her eye, Nine blocked out everything. Her senses dulled, letting down her guard, but she didn't care. If they wanted to kill her, then so be it. For once she would love to be at peace. No fighting. No wolves. And no green-eyed male. Just her and no one else. For the next couple of days, Nine fell into an almost dormant state. She didn't eat, talk or move from her position. Even Dexter could not get her to do anything, but he did understand that she needed space, and told that to a very worried mate. "Are you sure?" Slade asked anxiously, running a hand through his hair, and stared longingly at his mate. Dexter nodded, soft eyes trailing to his friend. "She needs ths. Give her time," he said, and looked back at the alpha. Ever since Nine refused to accept him, Slade has been feeling the effects of her rejection. Black bags below his dim green eyes, his stubble growing longer, and his normally straight posture slowly began to slouch. Dexter felt sorry for him. An alpha needed a mate more than any wolf out there. Leading a pack takes a strain on them, and at the end of the day, an alpha returns home to his mate who would make them feel better. Dexter was sure Nine could feel the pull, but was confused at what it was. He wished he could answer her questions, but he needed to wait for the right time. tell her too early and 9 could retreat back to her older ways. Letting out a sigh, Dexter moved towards the exit. He didn't bother looking back at Slade because he knew he would stay. The alpha was determined to gain his mate's trust. He knew nothing could stop an alpha once they had their mind set. Smiling, he began to walk to the pack house. Finally he felt like he had a home. Everyone in the pack treated him nicely and he liked it, only wishing 9 could be with him as well. He misses his friend dearly, but he needed to stay away from her and limit the amount of time of visits. He hoped that 9 would be more comfortable and attached to Slade since he stays with her more than he did. "Hey Dexter." A voice brought him out of his reverie. Blinking, Dexter saw in a distance Wilson calling him over. He was the pack's healer, and instantly they both connected. Dexter was knowledgeable about the anatomy of werewolves thanks to Victor, and Alpha Slade allowed him to help Wilson out in treating injured werewolves. It came to a surprise for Dexter, because he was still a rogue and could easily cause more harm to the werewolves. But Slade trusted him enough to take care of his pack. Until he and 9 was formally accepted through the ritual, they were still rogues, but for now, he was grateful to finally be needed somewhere. "I could use a little help here," Wilson called out, making the ginger-haired man smile. "See coming." Meanwhile in the jailhouse, Slade paced the length of the room whilst taking glances at his still mate. Pausing, he groaned, hands moving to his disheveled hair, and tilted his head back. Staring at the ceiling, he blinked a couple of times before running his hands over his face tiredly. In an ideal situation, if he met his mate like the ordinary and fall in love at first sight, then they would have already been living together, and every night he could get to hold her, as they sleep next to each other. But unfortunately, Slade would have to hold off all of those thoughts. He needed to take baby steps with his beauty, but he'd be lying if he said he was patient when it came to his mate. Rolling his tense shoulders, he moved towards the table near the entrance and picked up the tray with raw meat on it. 9 needed to eat, and Dexter told him that Victor only gave her a protein diet. It made Slade wonder if she ever ate anything sweet. Shaking his head, Slade moved to the front of the bars, hoping the smell of the meat will entice her. "I brought you food," he mumbled. Even though Dexter said she was blocking everyone out, Slade knew she was listening. His mate was a warrior, they never truly let their guard down. "You should really eat something." Silence. Slade bent down and opened the latch, and pushed the tray inside the cage. It slid across the floor before stopping a couple of feet away from 9. "Please eat, 9." His voice fell into almost a whisper. His wolf was extremely worried for his mate, but there was only so much Slade could do. The rest was up to her. Sighing, Slade straightened up. "I'll be back soon, okay?" When she didn't reply, he moved to the door. The quicker he deals with his duties, the quicker he can return to his mate. With that in mind, Slade moved fast with his responsibilities. As she heard the door slam shut, 9's eyes snapped open. Lifting her head, she turned to the door with narrowed eyes. Swishing her tail in irritation at the green-eyed male, she got up and stretched like a cat, and letting out a long yawn. 9 thought that she could block out everyone and find some sort of peace, but as soon as that male entered the room, her body protested and subconsciously her senses followed him. With her moment of peace disrupted, 9 opted for some strict ignoring skills, but even that didn't last long, as she would have liked. She faked her almost dead state so the male would get bored at the lack of responses on her part. Unfortunately for her, the male brought Dexter, and it took everything in 9 not to turn around and go over to her friend. She barely sees him anymore, and it was scaring her. Were those wolves treating Dexter fairly? Was her friend forgetting about her? 9 was close to making Dexter stay with her, but she would not be selfish. He sacrificed so much for her, and if he was happy then she will not ruin it. But how she missed his company instead of having that annoying alpha. Moving to the meat, she laid down right in front of it, staring at it longingly. Nine's mouth began to water at the temptation. The urge to eat it was very strong, and the beast inside was hungry for some food. An ordinary werewolf can for days without food, but Nine could last a maximum of 3 days before the hunger kicks in. Her body uses up a lot of energy, both physically and mentally. The only reason why she has not wolfed down the meat is because if she ate it, then no doubt the green-eyed male would know she was back to herself. Then he would begin to irritate her again. She didn't like how well the stupid male could read her. Not even her master was that good, and he's known her from the moment she was born. Without permission, her tongue came out and took a big lick at the chunk of meat. She almost purred at the taste. When her stomach growled, Nine forgot all about the repercussions and took a bite, only to swallow it whole. She chowed down the rest of the meat like she never tasted meat before. Licking her muzzle, she lapped up the remaining blood, savoring the taste. It took a second for Nine to realize her mistake, but she couldn't regret it. When it came to food, there was no stopping her. Guess now the male will get extra annoying, she thought with a huff. Nine resumed her previous position and prepared herself to face that stupid and persistent male. She would see how long she could ignore him until she cracked and bite his hand off, vowing not to miss the next time. A couple of hours passed when Nine heard the door creak open, and a familiar scent drifted in the room. She prepared herself for the annoying green-eyed male. "I knew you were awake." Nine could feel the smug smirk. It took a lot of self-control to not go over there and wipe it off his face. "I'll admit, you had me worried there for a second." The male let out a sheepish chuckle whilst Nine thought about ways to get rid of him. Her first plan was to kill him, but she promised Dexter. Maybe she could fatally injure him. Sensitive ears picked up rustling movement coming for the alpha. Nine had the urge to turn around once she heard him speak. "I know you hate me," he paused. She could feel his eyes bore at her back. "But please take care of yourself. I'll even leave if you want to eat in private, or need time to yourself. All you need to do is ask." Nine. Involuntary, Nine let out a snort and immediately regretted it. She fell right into his trap, knowing that she would respond to his question, because her master never asked her to do something and only commanded. So naturally she rebelled and gave some sort of reaction to his question. The alpha laughed because he knew he got her too. Since there was no point in pretending, Nine got up and glared lethally at the male, hoping he would cower like the other werewolves, but quickly figuring out that this male had a death wish as he grinned stupidly at her. "So are you going to finally start talking to me?" he said, green eyes gleaming in happiness. Nine felt like her body had a mind of its own, as she looked away from his cheerfulness, and said bitterly through the link, "No." Slade's whole demeanor changed into giddiness. He felt like he was on top of the world, and all because his mate was talking to him, but being stubborn about it. Letting out a small chuckle, he decided to humor her in an attempt to keep her talking. "All right, but you'll talk to me when you're ready, okay?" His lips twitched to hold in a smirk. Growling at his attitude, Nine stood up and turned away from him, making sure her backside was facing him before laying down. Grinning at this side of his mate, Slade decided to leave her for now, but when tomorrow comes, she will talk to him. Okay, I got the message. I'm leaving now, but I will be back tomorrow," he said and waited. Not a second later, his mate huffed in response. Chuckling one last time, he bid Nine goodbye and left the room with a large grin. Taking a deep breath, Slade took notice of the darkness surrounding him. Glancing up to the sky, he wondered if Nine ever saw the stars. He would ask her tomorrow and maybe get to know her instead of having to ask Dexter. But for now he headed to the pack house for dinner. His family noticed his good mood, and all he could respond was a love-sick smile. Everyone was happy for him, and even Dexter was surprised how quickly Nine was opening up to him. It made Slade feel even more special and smug to know that his mate accepted him more easily. When it was time to finally go to sleep, Slade wished his family good night before heading out the door. He stripped down his clothes and left them on the porch for the morning and then shifted into his massive, grey wolf. The change came quickly and Slade began to jog towards the jailhouse. Once he reached it, he trotted around the building until he was outside his mate's cell. Being extra quiet, he snuck up and peeked through the window. Fast asleep, his mate was curled on the floor and let out small snores, which he found extremely cute. Shaking his head in amusement, he laid down under the window and closed his eyes. From the very first night, Slade would sleep outside with his mate, because he could not sleep alone, nor will he allow himself to sleep in comfort while his mate suffered in a cell. He didn't mind though, at least like this he can be closer to her. Slade curled tighter to keep in the warmth, as an icy breeze swept through his fur, but his thoughts were preoccupied on a particularly stubborn she-wolf to notice the cold. With a content sigh, he let his dreams take over. The morning came too quickly for Nine's liking. Yawning, she stood up and shook her midnight fur. Lazy looking around the room, her eyes fell to the small window and walked towards it. She glanced out and stared in awe at the sun and let out a wolfish grin. She'd probably never get used to how beautiful the world is. Nine happily took a deep breath of fresh air, but scrunched up her nose in disgust when she caught a drift of a certain scent. Stupid male. Shaking her head, she turned away from the window and almost jumped 2 feet in the air when her wide eyes landed on the alpha. Hey! The green-eyed male roguishly smiled and waved his hand. Nine was still on guard, her back arched and fur bristled as she took peeks from the door to the male, wondering how he got there without her knowing. I was actually here the whole time, if you're wondering, he replied sheepishly and rubbed the back of his neck. Growling at him, Nine realized in her utter disbelief that she was getting used to his presence, and even though the male still agitates the beast, he barely bothers her for some reason. Sitting on her hind legs, Nine analyzed the male and decided which spot on his body would be the weakest. Slade awkwardly laughed as his mate checked him out, but not in the way he would have liked. Why do you look like you're gonna attack me? He asked, but showed no fear. He was calm, too calm, but in the back of his mind, he trusted Nine with his life even if she was the one going to kill him. He'd rather be killed by his mate than anyone else. Her black slits connected with his green eyes. Slade raised an eyebrow when Nine let out a sinister grin, showing off her pearly white teeth. It was like he caught her red-handed in planning the crime. All right, you know what? Slade moved to the cage door and gripped the lock. If you want to take a bite out of me, then do it. He said gruffly and without hesitation unlocked the latch, and was about to open it when a sudden voice rang out in his head. The moment you do, I will not hesitate to kill you. Pausing in his actions to stare at his mate, Slade felt almost irritated. It's been 2 weeks since they found each other, and every time Nine would remind him that she will kill him because Victor trained her to. But Slade has yet to see Nine actually attack him, or one of the pack members. He knew he could trust his mate, because she unconsciously proved to him that she can be in control of her actions. Like the incident with the guard and those teenage boys provoking her a couple of days ago. She could have easily slaughtered them, and yet, not a single scratch from her. She just needed to learn to depend on others to care for her, and no expect anything in return. Why must you kill everyone? I won't let anyone hurt you. Why can't you trust me to protect you? Slade started to get exasperated. He couldn't help it. His mate was frustratingly stubborn. Slade's tense feelings were rubbing off on Nine, as she began to lowly snarl at the male. My master. Nine was cut off by the male's sudden aggravated growl. That bastard is not your master. He is nothing but a lying, sadistic murderer that manipulated you. Slade yelled, staring intensely into his Nine's eyes, something she was not used to. He took a step forward until he was an inch from the bars, but a foot away from Nine, who stood frozen on the other side. The male's breathing became heavy, fists clenched, and his voice dropped low and huskily as he said strongly, "But I'm glad that Victor wasn't able to change you, because you are nothing but the most beautiful, loyal and stubborn-headed wolf I've ever met." He let out a breathless chuckle, eyes bored deeply into hers. "And I wouldn't have it any other way." Nine couldn't find the right words to show how shocked she was. She didn't even realize that she stopped growling and wasn't trying to take a bite out of him. Had it been any other wolf, Nine would have already finished him off. But this male was somehow different. Finally becoming aware of how close she was to him, Nine stood up and took a step back. "Don't." His deep voice paused her actions. "Don't move away from me." Slade whispered softly, hoping his mate will understand that he wanted her to be his equal. 9I Alpha. Rogues broke through the borders. Ryan said through the mind link. Slade silently cursed at the timing, but he had to go. He turned to his mate who was looking everywhere but him. 9, I'm sorry but I have to leave. That made her look at him. There are rogues in my territory that need to be taken care of. I'll have some guards standing outside to protect you, he said firmly, ignoring the obvious look from his mate. When it comes to her safety, Slade will go all out. Regretfully, he had to leave and jogged out the door before shifting into his wolf and running through the woods. Slade hoped that Nine would not withdraw back into her guarded state by the time he returned. He had to quickly deal with this situation and then get back to his beautiful mate. With that thought in mind, he quickened his pace. Oblivious to the male's thoughts, Nine was still trying to process what happened a few minutes ago. The more she thought about it, the more confused she got. Instead, Nine focused on the male's last words. Rogues that need to be taken care of. That immediately brought up Nine's spirit, as a red cloud whirled in her eyes. I think a good fight is long overdue. She let out a nasty snarl. Her eyes aimed at the door of the cage, where the male foolishly forgot to relock. Feeling her muscle tense and the beast stirring, Nine let out an ear-piercing howl signaling the beginning of the hunt and burst through the doors. Chapter 11. Nine's nose picked up the foul stench of rogues and ran towards it. She barely paid attention to the forest, her focus was solely locked on her prey. Nothing could stop Nine once she got into the hunting mode. The wind shifted downwind, masking her scent but clearly giving away the rogue's location. Sensitive ears picked up the sound of footsteps coming closer. Slowing down, she crouched down at a nearby bush, but given her large body, only half was covered. Not that she cared, Nine wasn't much of an ambush hunter, but it wouldn't help if the prey spotted her before she could reach them. Black slits locked on the first prey, followed by the others. As soon as the rogue was in striking range, Nine exploded out of her hiding spot. The wolf, who was clearly caught off guard, skidded across the ground, but before he could do anything else, Nine already in front of him, jaws wide opened and snapped down on the back of his neck. An audible crunch from the rogue's spine broke through the air. Nine dropped the still alive, but paralyzed wolf to the ground. She barely glanced at him, as he let out pitiful cries and tried to move. Nine let him suffer, and turned towards the 5 remaining victims, who abruptly stopped to stare at her in terror. Head high, teeth bared and lowly growling, Nine felt the beast wanting to be in the hunt. She didn't hold him back, and soon her eyes clouded crimson red. Noticing the shift immediately, the rogues wasted no time in taking down the threat. They couldn't allow the beast to take control, they only had a short window of opportunity to even have a slim chance of taking down the savage. It was their only hope of surviving. If they run now, the beast's predatory instincts would surely kick in, guaranteeing their deaths. 2 flanked Nine's sides. The third and much larger, braver one, stood his ground and faced Nine head-on. She sensed he was more dominant than the rest, which could only mean he was the leader. Too bad he didn't act like one, as Nine scrunched up her nose when she caught a whiff of the fear rolling off him. Using the moment of distraction, the small charcoal wolf on Nine's right side rushed forward with his head low and jaws opened, aiming for the she-wolf's front leg. What the wolf failed to know was that the beast predicted his moves before the rogue even decided to act. The beast's actions were always driven by instincts, and by the time the rogue figured it out, Nine's paw lifted up, causing the rogue to bite down on nothing but air. Realizing he was in the danger zone, the small wolf tried to scuttle back, but a sudden bulk crashed down on his head, forcing him to the ground. He let out loud yelps and whimpers for his friends to aid him, but they were a lot hesitant when it came to the she-wolf. Nine stomped down on the rogue. The weight of her paw and grip of her claws on the rogue's head, she held him down as he squirmed his body, twisting at awkward angles to escape her clutches, but her strength was too strong for the weak rogue. Clearly failing to learn from his comrade, the mix of grey and white rogue on the other side of Nine used this opportunity to attack, thinking the beast's attention was on the smaller wolf. Crouching down low, the rogue targeted the she-wolf's neck and leapt towards the beast, only for his eyes to widen in horror and surprise when the beast whipped around at lightning speed and clamped down on the side of the rogue's exposed neck. With the pressure of her jaws, Nine instantly killed the rogue. Flicking her head, she effortlessly flung the dead weight into a tree. Her gleaming, predatory eyes moved slowly to the frozen leader. At least he was smart enough to not attack, but equally stupid for not using the time to run. It might have given him a few minutes to live a little longer, but either way, he was going to die. Still feeling the small rogue under her paw, Nine snarled mockingly at the leader and pushed harder into the rogue's head. The cracking of the skull and painful cries coming from him were almost deafening. The rogue was dead, but the body twitched violently. Nine took strong, confident strides towards the leader, who was backing up and looked like he would bolt in any second. Suddenly Nine felt a small sting on her left hind leg. Turning her head around, she glanced at another rogue who must have snuck up behind her. In all honesty, Nine knew none of them were much of a threat to her. They were more of a means of taking out her pent-up emotions. The wolf was furiously shaking his head, trying to rip out of her meat from her thick hind. To Nine it was a humorous sight. Did he really think that would do anything? She thought maliciously. She didn't have a chance to retaliate when suddenly a massive dark grey burst out and ran straight into the rogue, ripping him away from her leg. Nine reined in the beast when an annoyingly familiar scent drifted into her nose, calming her almost instantly, but that did not stop her irritation and anger. She watched on with distaste as the alpha stood protectively in front of her and snarled viciously at the leader, who in turn responded by making a quick dash for it. Not pleased with his actions and for letting the rogue escape, Nine growled dangerously at the alpha and swiftly moved next to Slade and bit down hard on his thick neck. Slade didn't have time to flinch at the sudden attack when he was released and watched on in pure shock and surprise as his mate ran after the rogue. She didn't finish him off, he thought excitedly, eyes gleaming happily at the thought of his mate finally learning to accept him sent Slade into an almost frenzy mode. If his wolf didn't remind him that there was still a rogue that could hurt his mate, then Slade would have acted like a love-sick puppy and giddily roll in the dirt with his tongue out, just thinking of his gorgeous mate. But he still had to protect Nine, even though he knew she was fully capable of taking care of herself. It was his duty as her mate to make sure she was safe. There was no way anyone would lay a mark on her if he could help it. Slade winced when he finally felt the full force of his mate's bite, and damn, he felt like he'd been shot multiple times with silver bullets. She had one hell of a bite, and pitted those who faced Nine. Large drops of blood tainted the ground, but Slade fought through the pain and charged after his mate. He pushed himself and caught up very quickly, only because he saw his mate sadistically playing with the terrified rogue. He watched as she bound around the wolf, who was lying on his back in submission, but Nine was having none of it. She nipped parts of his body, leaving nasty gashes, as she tried to coax him to run. She and the beast enjoyed hunts, as they were much more fun than just killing them. Wanting to end the poor rogue's misery, Slade moved closer with his head and tail high. He had to show his dominance over Nine, but as he got closer, she too stood to her full length, exactly the same size as he was. Together they would make a formidable pair. No one would want to go up against them. Two extremely dominant werewolves were far more dangerous than any rogue out there, especially if one had a beast within that always bloodlusts, and would attack without a second thought if only he was not restrained by the human side. Eyes constricted into slits, 9 snarled ferociously, claiming the prey, and warning Slade to back off. Not heeding the warning, Slade immediately latched on the rogue's neck since it was the closest thing to him, and dragged it away from 9 whilst sending a threatening growl to his mate. Instantly she retaliated and snapped down on the rogue's lower back, and soon began a tug-of-war. Neither one backing down even though the rogue was long dead. Aggressively they pulled and shook with all their might, all the while glaring intensely into each other's eyes, wanting the other to let go. None of the dominant werewolves noticed the rest of the pack members watching in shock at the scene before them. Bones cracked, muscles and ligaments torn apart from the midsection of the limbless rogue. Narrowing her eyes, 9 tightly shut her jaws and began to shake her head viciously side to side, breaking eye contact with the alpha. The force from both animals broke the rogue into 2. Slade held the upper section, and 9 the lower in their mouths, signaling a draw. For now they were satisfied with the outcome, but there would be another challenge. "You know I could have taken care of those mutts," 9 snarled through the link. Slade responded with a wolfish snort and let go of the rogue. He didn't particularly want to argue with his mate, not after they had a dominance war. He was more than proud that she could easily match him, not submitting even though he used his alpha power on her. "I promised I would protect you with my life. No one will hurt you while I'm around," he replied strongly and inched closer to his mate, wanting to finally be near her, and not separated by bars. Dropping the dead weight, 9 finally took notice of the rest of the pack, who watched her cautiously, ready to attack if she so much as glances at their alpha the wrong way. She may be their future Luna, but she could destroy their pack. Without an alpha, a pack would fall. Feeling the tension in the air, it fed the beast, and slowly her white eyes clouded red. The beast wishing to come out and play, but 9 wouldn't allow it. Until they made the first move, then she wouldn't slaughter them. 9 didn't know how to feel about thinking first before killing. It was strange to her, but a promise is a promise, and she would not disappoint Dexter. "I won't let them hurt you," Slade said soothingly, making 9 turn to him, noticing how close he was to her, but she did not back down. Slade could feel his muscles shaking in the need to brush against her, but 9 was fast becoming agitated with the members around her. "Trust me, 9. Finally snapping her head towards him, 9 scoffed in his face before twisting around to create some much-needed distance. Slade sighed and watched as his mate make her way towards the jailhouse. The others didn't say anything, some stayed to deal with the massacre, and the rest followed their alpha, who trailed after 9, looking at her longingly. Coming to the clearing, 9 slowly walked towards her cell. It was a habit of hers, whenever she had a fight, she had to return to her cell or else her master would be furious. 9. Her head turned to see a very worried Dexter running towards her. Like a mother, Dexter fussed over her body, checking for any injuries while blurting out concerned questions. "I'm fine, Dex," she said, nuzzling into his shoulder with her eyes closed. 9 heard him sigh in relief before he pulled back slightly. He had to be very careful with being around 9 now that she has a mate. He may be her only family and friend, but Alpha Slade can only be pushed so far before he snapped. "Good." He nodded and then grinned, eyes twinkling in happiness. "Look at you 9. You're out outside with no restraints." He looked at her proudly, and that felt good to 9. Her fur suddenly bristled. Peering around, 9 could feel the gaze of stray werewolves. Some were curious, others cautious. Either way she didn't like it, but before she could even twitch, her cat eyes caught sight of the alpha now in human form. His bare, golden chest gleamed with light perspiration, enhancing his muscular build. His brown hair flopped over his emerald eyes as he stared at her intensely. She may have been staring, but Nine had only one thought on her mind, and that was not what a normal she-wolf thinks when they see their mate. Nine's predatory instincts instantly locked on the alpha because in this form, he was completely vulnerable. Shutting her eyes and shaking her head violently, Nine knew that sometimes the beast would put malicious thoughts into her head. Most times she didn't even know if it was even her thoughts alone. "Nine, you okay?" A husky voice made her snap her eyes open to glare at the alpha. Subconsciously Nine was slowly beginning to respect the alpha. He was the only one other than her master and Dexter to not fear her. It wouldn't be long before she accepted him and called him by his first name, but until then Nine would remain stubborn. Snapping her jaw and growling in an attempt to scare him away, her mate only rolled his eyes and crookedly smiled at her. "Once you are done with your empty threats, that only increased Nine's temper and snarls. I was wondering if you could maybe." Nine's growling ceased. She tilted her head sidewards and stared curiously at the alpha. She couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. He was gazing down at the ground, but not in submission, and he rubbed the back of his head whilst stuttering out words. His behavior was making her extremely cautious since she never experienced it before. While the alpha was blabbering things completely going nowhere in his speech, Nine looked to Dexter, who stood quietly, for help. "What is wrong with him?" she asked, wrinkling her nose in distaste, and took a step back away from the now weird alpha. Dexter was trying to hold in his laughter at the very shy Slade, who was trying to ask Nine if she wanted to go on a tour around the territory. Too bad he began to sprout out things that were making Nine confused by the second. She'd barely experienced other emotions like love, desire, shyness. They were all foreign to her. But in time Dexter knew that Alpha Slade would show her. Before he could answer Nine, Slade cut in. "So what do you say?" Slade nervously chuckled and felt heat go to his cheeks at the thought of how embarrassing he must look. Finally looking into her stunningly striking eyes, Slade's cheeks turned bright red, as she stared at him like he was a creep. Definitely not the reaction he wanted. Taking a deep breath he said, "Would you like to explore the pack's territory?" Nine's ears perked up at the word explore, but with the alpha, she was a little hesitant to go. Maybe she could get Dexter to show her, however, as she turned to her friend only to see him gone. Dexter guessed what Nine would do, so he quickly made himself scarce so Alpha Slade could get closer to his mate. Wanting to discover everything around her, Nine stiffly nodded. This may be her only chance to finally experience everything. She decided to take up the offer before the alpha changes his mind. What Nine did not expect, though, was the biggest grin the alpha shot at her. A sudden bolt ran through her, sending unfamiliar stings throughout her whole body. Immediately she created distance between the two, making the alpha's smile fall and twinkling eyes dimming. The alpha cleared his throat. He clearly looked saddened, but Nine didn't know why. Though she did have an idea. Wanting to prove it, she slowly moved closer to the male, and just like she thought, his eyes began to brighten. Nine pushed herself and moved even closer until she towered over the alpha. She could easily kill him, and he would not be able to protect himself in time. He must really trust her, or was really stupid. Nine went for the latter. She noticed that the alpha started to shake lightly, as he gazed up at her with some emotion she could not tell. Nine leaned down until she was eye level with him. Her nose was bombarded with his masculine scent, making her slightly dizzy. One thing for sure, he smelt the best from all the werewolves she encountered, possibly even better than Dexter. Meanwhile Slade was in heaven. His mate was inches from him. If she was human, he would have held her in his arms and gave her a breathless kiss. Slade found it hard to swallow at the thought of his mate. He was quickly becoming aroused and hoped she could not smell it. So before he lost control of his wolf who wanted to come out, he spoke. "So about that tour?" His voice was extremely husky and deep, forcing Slade to clear his throat in an attempt to calm himself. Without warning, Nine sneezed in the alpha's face. His scent finally got to her, and she backed up, where she sneezed 2 more times before calming down. It would take time before she gets used to his strong smell. Blinking her eyes open, she turned her gaze to the alpha, and saw him slightly scrunch up his face, with his eyes shut tight. Opening them, his green eyes met her slightly wide, white ones just staring at him. Slade could guess she was probably wondering what he would do. No doubt Victor would lash out for this, the thought easily angering him, but he forced it away for another time. For now, he was going to spend the day with his mate. With that thought, Slade's mood brightened up considerably. Taking a hand, Slade ran it down his face and then flicked it. "Well then," Slade said dryly, not the slightest disgusted. He could hear a few lingering pack members trying to hold in their laughs. He too was amused at his mate. Nine was always surprising him. "Shall we go before something else happens?" he said with a non-threatening grin. His smile only widened when he saw her relax, but still kept a wary eye on him. "Baby steps, Slade, baby steps," he reminded himself. Slade began to walk towards the outskirts of the pack house. It wasn't so close, but there would still be people and maybe a few kids lingering about. He trusted Nine and just knew she would just observe them. One of Nine's best quality was her natural curiosity. It outweighed her need to kill. Slade hoped that it won't one day be her weakness. They reached the pack house and Nine was looking everywhere in awe. Her body was tense, but her mind was running a mile a minute. She could only wish she could go up to the strange things, and give them a whiff, or touch, wondering how they feel or smell. Stopping near the borders of the woods, Nine spotted a lot of werewolves who were also watching her cautiously. They could feel the dangerous aura emitted by her, making their own wolves stand on guard. A sharp shrill made Nine snap her head to the right. The sight before her caused her to take steps back. "Nine." Slade frowned, noticing his mate's nervousness. She seemed almost scared. Immediately Slade scanned the area trying to find the threat. Meanwhile, Nine was going to face the biggest challenge yet. Chapter 12. Slade. Little Ariana squealed, ran up to her older brother and wrapped her arms around his leg, grinning up at him. Bending down, Slade picked her up and held her in his arms. The sight of an alpha male taking care of his little sister would turn on a lot of females. To bad Nine looked like she wanted to make a run for it. "Hello, my little minion." He teased and tapped her nose lightly. Pouting, Ariana glared at her big brother before her big doe eyes caught sight of a stiff Nine, who was hoping to blend into the background. Nine watched in horror, as the little girl squirmed out of the alpha's hold and then moved to stand in front of her, staring in deep curiosity and awe. The girl was so small and vulnerable. With just a flick of her paw, Nine could send her body flying. It was her very first time coming into contact with a child and knew from Dexter how weak they are. Never once did Nine ever experience being a normal child who was loved by their parents, teased by siblings and played with other kids her age. Only slaughter and death surrounded her. Which meant that Nine had no clue how to act around children. Dexter told her that they could easily get hurt and need a lot of guidance. Apparently they didn't grow up like Nine, ready to kill on sight, and could easily handle severe injuries, so she couldn't relate to them. They were completely innocent, and even the beast was confused to what the little one was. Nine was thankful that the beast didn't want to attack, instead chose to ignore the little girl, as she was no threat to him. "Hi. I'm Ariana." She waved enthusiastically and smiled. Nine could not move an inch as she stared down at the girl with wide eyes. She could feel the amusement rolling off the alpha as he gazed at her intently. He too had a large grin on his face, clearly enjoying Nine's discomfort. "You must be Big Brother's mate. You're pretty big for a female," Ariana said, her grin growing. "Ariana," Slade said with a stern tone, If you don't have anything good to say, then don't say anything at all. Whipping her head to her brother, Ariana rolled her eyes, clearly showing she was spending too much time with her older sister Tori. I meant that as a good thing. She's so pretty and will make the perfect Luna. Slade couldn't agree more and nodded his head thoughtfully. That is true. He moved his gaze to shoot Nine a wink, but his green eyes only caught sight of empty air. Hey, where'd she go? Ariana asked the very question her brother was thinking. Feeling himself panic, Slade twisted around and searched frantically for him mate. Upon hearing giggles and laughter to his right, Slade snapped his head to see children trying to climb on top of a frozen, black wolf that tried to sneak away. Slade let out a lung full of air in relief. Instead of going to his mate's immediate aid, he stood back, arms crossed, and just watched her in amusement. For the first time since their meeting, Nine looked like she needed him. In fact, her eyes were pleading with him to save her. She was literally a statue as the kids grabbed fists full of hair and tried to pull themselves up, probably thinking she was the closest thing to a horse. Her front left paw was slightly lifted off the ground as to take another step, but didn't fully complete the process, so it was stuck midair. Nine's head was low in the closest thing to a submission posture, easily accessible for greedy hands that tugged at her ears. Hey! I wanna ride the horsey. Ariana shouted and then ran up to the rest of the group and also tried to climb upon poor, defenseless Nine, who jumped when one kid pulled on her tail. Her startled action caught a small boy, who was already on Nine's back, to lose his grip and plummet to the ground. With her 6 feet 6 inches massive frame, the fall took its toll on the boy, who began to cry and wail out loud whilst holding his broken arm. Nine's sensitive ears picked up the screeches, and quickly she shied away from the group. Slade jogged to help the boy, but changed his course when he saw to his left Tori, along with his mother running towards the boy. While Tori and the boy's mother comforted the child, Slade moved to stand to the side of Nine. He hesitated for a second before laying a comforting hand through his mate's lush fur. Slade felt like he'd been shot. Explosive sensations burst through his fingers down to his feet, sending his body into a frenzy. He felt his wolf wanting to rush out, but somehow Slade held him in. He knew the reason was because since he first met his mate, he had not touched her. Now it was like all the feelings were coming out at once. Meanwhile, Nine felt her body react violently to the alpha's touch. It was like she had endless energy coursing through her. She felt invincible, and that was a very dangerous thought. The feelings were stirring up the beast, clearly wanting to release some of this sudden energy from the alpha's touch. Nine didn't know she was staring at his hand until he removed it and gazed at her so intensely that it did funny things to her body. Things she didn't like. Hated. It reminded her of her master. A sudden memory of his beatings flashed through her mind. Nine's body reacted naturally to the thought of her master, but instead aiming it at the alpha. Her mood shifted and she viciously snarled at him, baring her jagged teeth, hackles rigid, and ears flat against her head. The sudden aggressiveness frightened the children. Their werewolf instinct kicked in and they all ran away from the scary she-wolf, screaming in fear to the safety of their parents. Slade was more than ready to take Nine away before it turns dangerous, when suddenly his fiery and hot-headed sister spoke up. Oi! Quit scaring the brats with your growling. Tori yelled at Nine, who was completely taken off guard with the she-wolf. Once again, Nine had no experience being around since she was always surrounded by males. Feeling herself become puzzled again, Nine stopped growling and just stared at Tori in uncertainty, not knowing what to do, as the she-wolf began to rant, completely oblivious to the danger right in front of her if Nine were to suddenly feel Tori was a threat. Do you know how hard it is to get those little midgets to keep quiet? It's not fair that I get babysitting duty. Tori exclaimed and threw her hands in the air. Ah, Tori. Slade tried to get a word in, sneaking glances at his mate to make sure she wasn't going to attack. Sure, Slade. I'm trying to complain here. Tori scolded her brother and then turned towards his mate. She had no idea what the big fuss was about with her future sister-in-law. Sure, she's pretty big for a she-wolf, but other than that nothing seemed wrong with her, if you also ignore the dangerous aura emitted from her. From now on, this here, she gestured to the land around her, including the pack house, is a no-growl zone. Especially when there's brats around. Don't want them complaining to their parents about my babysitting. Tori huffed and rolled her eyes at the memories of when she had to bribe the annoying little monsters to not say anything. She would rather have this job where she deals with kids for a couple of hours than getting an actual job that pays less, but requires much more effort, and having to be talked to people she would most likely never see again. For Tori, it's always the lazy way. Understand? She said sternly with a raised eyebrow. Instead of answering, Nine just opted for an escape route. Pivoting, she ran straight into the woods, but not before hearing Tori say, "Strange one, isn't she?" Wanting to be far away from everyone, Nine kept on running but soon heard footsteps gaining on her. Abruptly stopping, she half twisted around and waited for the alpha since he was the only one willing to follow her. Unfortunately, Nine underestimated how close he was to her, and as a result the alpha crashed right into her. With a yelp, their bodies collided, sending them tumbling to the ground. Opening her eyes, Nine glared venomously at the alpha whose body was lying on top of her. Slade was stunned and could feel himself become embarrassed because he crashed into his mate. He felt like a teenage boy, humiliating himself in front of his crush, only this crush had the potential to kill him, and he wouldn't even fight back. Both tried to get up, but their legs got tangled, causing Slade's large wolf to collapse on Nine. She could handle his weight, as they were roughly the same size, and since she was built to handle werewolves much larger than her, but Nine could not handle the irritation and frustration of that moment. With her anger rising, Nine twisted her head and clamped down on the alpha's muscular shoulder. Shocked at her actions, the alpha was momentarily frozen and Nine used that to her advantage, where she used her legs and pushed the male off her. Her power sent him flying a couple of meters away and skidding across the ground. If it were an ordinary werewolf, then for certain they would have flown right into the trees. Standing on all fours, Nine shook her fur and snapped at the almost dazed male. I am sorry. It's just you turned around suddenly, and I didn't stop in time. Slade explained through the link whilst getting up. He looked pleadingly at his furious mate. He figured it was going to be a while before she got used to his touch. Why can't you and everyone just stay away from me? Nine snarled back. She was tired of them. Why couldn't they leave her alone? We just want to help you, he argued, taking a step towards her. We want you to be able to do whatever you want. To not stay in that forsaken cell and live in luxury with me in our house. Slade was heavily breathing. His emotions were running high and wished just for once she could act like a true mate and be by his side. To let him hold her, be by her side to tell her how much he loves her and for Nine to return his love. But fate had different plans. Nine's pupils turned to black slits. I will never be part of a pack. No one would want a monster like me. She screamed, thinking about all those werewolves she massacred for her master's pleasure. I want you. His voice echoed loudly in her head, making the beast stand attention. I need you, he said softly. By now Slade was nose to nose with Nine. Give me a chance. Just one, Nine, it's all I need. Slade begged, staring straight into her blank eyes. Nine closed her eyes and slightly turned her head away. She took a deep breath to calm herself. Her mind was running a mess about his request. Could she trust him? Dexter does, and that was more than enough for Nine. Would he be like her master? But that answer was obvious. In no way has the alpha shown that he was anything close to the way her master treats her. The question that was bothering her the most was, could she control herself? She may be in control of the beast most of the time, but sometimes she slips. Nine's mind flashed to the memory of her 13th birthday, where she became of age. As a gift from her master, Nine was forced to fight far more werewolves than before. She could feel herself slowly losing energy, but she was not allowed a break. Her master told her beforehand, he wanted to see how far she could fight before her body gave out. Losing count after 100, Nine finally felt her body give way. She didn't care that there were still 3 rogues in the ring, and as soon as they saw her collapse, they were quick to gang up on her and attack. She didn't care that they were going to kill her. The only thing she would regret when she left this world was Dexter, but then again, maybe it was for the best. Dexter did tell her that he'd always wanted to join a pack. After she was gone he finally could. Nine's eyes stared blackly at the rogues as they raced towards her. One of them aimed for her exposed neck, and just as he was about to reach her, everything went blank. To her surprise, Nine realized that the beast suddenly took full control of her mind and body. She was forcefully pushed to the back of her mind and fell into darkness. She was no longer in command, and instead she felt like she was in an endless abyss. She began to panic. Nine had no clue where she was, no idea what was going on. Relax. An unexpected voice surrounded her, but she knew who it was. It was their first time speaking. The other times Nine would just feel his emotions, but never did she think that the beast could communicate with her. I refuse to let you kill us. I will show them the true power of a lichen. It's my turn to have some fun. His dark laugh sent a violent chill down her spine. He sounded sadistic like her master. 13-year-old Nine could do nothing but wait. Even if she tried fighting him, her attempts were futile. The beast possessed raw power, far too strong for a little girl. Nine was nothing without the beast. When she finally woke up, Nine blinked a couple of times to clear her daze. Shaking her head and lifting it, Nine took a step back in shock. Her wide eyes slowly took in the horrific sight before her. Every single rogue in the arena and crowd was viciously slaughtered. There was blood was everywhere. It tainted the floor, walls and the limbless bodies that littered the ground. Nine was covered with fresh blood, her dark fur hid it, but the stench was there. Her body was scarred with nasty gashes, bites and cuts, a sign of the rogues' helpless attempts to protect themselves from the beast. Her body began to shake in terror, and her heart felt like bursting out her chest. At that moment Nine feared what she could do. Nine was terrified that she may have killed her only family, but she never felt so relieved when she saw Dexter. He was standing next to her master, completely worried. They were able to lock themselves in a room that was almost impossible to break. It was also the first time she had seen Dexter afraid of her. That memory was forever engraved in Nine. Never did she want to see Dexter look at her like that. Like he believed she was a monster. Her master, on the other hand, applauded her. He had a huge, malicious grin on his face and a wicked gleam in his eyes. He was more than pleased. Nine forced herself out of that memory. She refused to remember those dark times. Dexter had taken 6 years to try and convince Nine that she wasn't a monster, but she was. And she would never forget that. It was the first and last day the beast talked to her, but that didn't stop the dark thoughts entering her head. This was the reason why she could not be trusted around others. The risk of her snapping was too great. But she would try. She would try with all her might to keep him under lock and key, because for once in her entire life, Nine wanted to be normal. Even if it was for a short time. Bringing her eyes up to the alpha, Nine decided that he had the right to know if he was going to treat her like part of the pack. Aye. She stuttered and then looked away from him. Taking a deep breath, and letting it out slowly, Nine tried to speak again. I will try. She started and was about to continue when the alpha did something out of character, and yipped happily at her. 9 flinched back when his wet tongue licked her cheek. The male seemed to have lost control of his wolf, because she knew that the alpha would not act the way he is now. 9 could see the struggle in his eyes as the human and wolf battled for control. She couldn't do anything since she promised to give him a chance, and that meant she couldn't kill him, as the male began to rub against her and eagerly lick her neck and face. So she just stood there, staring at him in distaste, as he floundered around her in excitement, playfully growling and nipping at her, trying to get her to do something. Soon it became clear to 9 that the human was not even trying to get back into control, so she decided to take matters into her own hands. When the overly happy wolf was close to her face, 9 immediately snapped at his face, drawing blood from his muzzle. The alpha yelped in pain and backed off, the wound already healing. In seconds the green eyes became more prominent, showing that the human was in control. "Sorry." My wolf was excited. Slade apologized with a sheepish look. He too was over the moon, even more so when his mate allowed him to touch her. Goddess, did she feel so soft and tasted so sweet? He could only imagine how her skin felt. At least now Slade was one step closer for his dream to come true. "You didn't let me finish," 9 said, her voice turning serious. Slade, picking up on her mood, prepared himself for whatever his mate was going to say. "I'm sure Dexter told you what is inside of me." Her voice went soft, like she was ashamed of telling what she was. The alpha nodded stiffly. "Then you must know that there will be a day where I will slip." 9 stared deeply into his eyes. "One day I will lose control, and when that day comes, the beast will take full advantage, and there's nothing I can do to stop it." Slade tensed. The fur on his back bristled, scared to know what she says next. "When that day comes, you and everyone in your pack will die. Be part of our werewolf community. Subscribe."